This is episode 83 with Irene Moore.
Welcome to the Quarter Life Comeback Podcast, the show that empowers you to become the hero of your life's journey. With your host, Brian Tier.
I'm just not going to stop. What is up, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of the Quarter Life Comeback Podcast. I'm your host, as always, Brian Tier, and those were my words on this week's episode, where I shared my interview with Irene Moore for the Start Your Business Summit, which took place last week. Now, before we get into it, a shout out to today's sponsor. It is Rooster, the awesome alarm clock app that allows you to ditch the boring alarm tone and wake up to an alarm of your choice, whether that be voice notes from friends and family, inspiring channels, news headlines, sports reports, and so much more. You can check that out at Rooster Alarm and Audio Treats on the Google Play and App Store, and I highly recommend you check that out. Now, on to this week's episode, and Irene is a business consultant and startup strategist who helps aspiring entrepreneurs escape the rat race and start their dream business. Recently, Irene hosted the Start Your Business Summit, which was a 5-day virtual event featuring 13 successful entrepreneurs sharing their expertise and knowledge with attendees. Now, each day featured insightful interviews with some of the brightest minds in business and entrepreneurship. The conference was designed to take you on an in-depth journey through the various stages of starting up, from developing a CEO mindset to validating your business idea to developing your personal brand, and so much more. And in this episode, I decided to share my interview from the summit, where I spoke all about discovering your passion and purpose, as well as some personal entrepreneurial insights that I've learned along my own journey. If you are even thinking about starting your own business, you do not want to miss this. And I'm going to put a link in the show notes where you can go and check out the summit yourself. Now, in this episode, you're going to learn the 3 ways you know it's time to quit, how to deal with common mindset struggles of new entrepreneurs, the one thing separating the people who make it and those that don't, why you can't find your purpose without taking action, my top 3 steps to uncovering your bigger purpose, what to do when you have multiple passions, and the biggest thing I've learned on my entrepreneurial journey. As always, you can get the links and resources we mentioned in this episode at briantier.com/083. But for now, let's go hang out with Irene.
Hello and welcome back to the Start Your Business Summit. I'm your host, Irene Moore, and today I'm joined by the brilliant Brian Tier. Brian is an international coach and podcast host who helps ambitious people like you perform at their best. You can find out much more about his work at briantier.com, and all the links will be under this video. Brian, welcome so much to the summit.
Hello, Irene, and welcome to everybody watching.
Brilliant. We're so thrilled to have you. Now, I'm curious, can you tell us a little bit about how you started your coaching business?
Yeah, definitely. So my whole kind of story of going on this own path of mine started when I was about 25. And even before then, like growing up, I'd always kind of followed the rules and did what everybody said was, the path to success, if you will. And I did really well at school and at sports. And then I went to a good university. I did well there too, got a good job as a civil engineer. And I'd never really thought about, is this actually the path I want to be walking? And, am I doing what I really feel passionate about, which I know we'll speak about later. But basically at my 25th birthday, I was standing around the kitchen with my friends, and everyone was talking about work sucks, or they hate their job, but, it pays the bills at the end of the month. So whatever. And I didn't really think too much about this. Looking back now, I'm like, oh man, there's so much wrong with that. But I piped up randomly that, if I could resign now, I would. And the reason I said that is because I'd had a bursary because of my academic results. I'd had a bursary at my company for 2 years, which means that I had to, I got 2 years of academic tuition paid for, but then I had to work back those 2 years for them. But this was in the 3rd month of my 3rd year, or 2nd month of my 3rd year. So technically I could resign then. And I had this aha moment, like, whoa, I actually can. It's not a case of like, if I could resign, I would. I actually could. And so I can't remember how much time went by since then. It was probably about a week or two. And I was at work again. And, by this point, I'm sure many people, if they're watching the Start Your Business Summit, can relate to this. I would wake up in the morning, be like, oh, I got to go to work again. And then at work, I would check my watch, like, okay, 7 hours left, 6 hours left, 5 hours left, which is no place to be in. And so I messaged my dad and I said, Dad, there's something I need to tell you. You might know what it's about, but I'm thinking of resigning. And my dad, I was terrified because my parents, they did such a good job of raising us, and they're both really old school. And so I thought he'd say, you're just being a entitled millennial, or, like, welcome to the real world, or this is what reality is like. And instead, he took it kind of from the business side of view, because he was the managing director of a few businesses before he retired. And he said, if you're not adding value to the business, or you're not growing, or you're not enjoying what you're doing, the right thing to do is to resign. But not enough people do, because it's so easy and safe to cash your check at the end of the month. And within 30 minutes, I had handed in my letter of resignation. Wow. With no plan B of what to do next. But I knew that, and we'll speak about this, what made me decide to take that leap. But I knew that there was more in store for me. And after that, I went traveling for a while. I went backpacking with just the bag on my back for a couple of months. And without planning to do so, while I was away on that trip, I realized that what I'd always enjoyed doing was helping other people improve their lives. And, even when I was 6 years old, they say, like, what did you enjoy doing when you were young? When I was like 5, 6 years old, I would run over to someone if they got hurt or fell out of a tree, or whatever you do when you're 6 years old. I thought about studying medicine at a stage. So I recognized this pattern. And when I came back from overseas, I became a certified personal trainer and started training clients in that way. And that was, I enjoyed that. I'm still very passionate about health and fitness, but it wasn't the thing. And so I pivoted slightly to more health coaching. So not just exercise, but, the whole piece of that puzzle. And then again, I saw this same pattern of, I'm really passionate about health and I'm enjoying this type of work, but I want to help people improve their lives on a whole, on a sort of holistic level, and not just their health. And so that led to the pivot into life coaching. And even now, I feel like I'm in another pivot, moving towards sort of high performance and personal mastery kind of stuff, and mindset and that kind of thing with entrepreneurs. But that's pretty much the long, short story of how I started the coaching stuff.
So interesting. What I love about that, Brian, is that you almost intrinsically knew that what you weren't doing didn't feel right. There wasn't a big incident that happened. And I think a lot of people, potentially people who are watching this summit, are maybe sitting in a little bit of a period of unrest and can't quite identify what that is. And ultimately, from what it sounds like, you really were quite in tune with what your purpose was, even if it took you a little bit longer to get there. And I definitely want to get and talk more about that. But what I love as well is that you touched on the fact of almost what your dad said about a lot of people don't kind of make that switch, and it's very much a mindset. I guess a mindset issue. What are the most common with your coaching clients? What are the most common concerns that your clients tend to have around mindset when they think about becoming an entrepreneur or going solo?
Yeah, and I just want to touch on the previous thing again of, you said I intrinsically knew. I think yes and no. There's that saying of, when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. And I'd started reading about people via a site called Live Your Legend who had, started doing things that they enjoyed and getting paid to do it. So making an income and an impact. And that's when I started realizing, like, wow, there are actually people doing this. And I just like the idea of being able to design your lifestyle around your work and not the other way around. Your work around your life and not the other way around. And I didn't have anything tying me down. I didn't have any debts or any kids or wife or anything, which I do have now. I do have a wife now and a stepson. And so I thought, well, I'm still young. Now is the time to take this risk. And there's nothing wrong with a 9-to-5 if that's what someone is passionate about doing. But if you're feeling like you want to start your own business, which you probably are if you're watching this summit, then now is the time to take that risk. And it is always the time, which doesn't mean just taking the leap and quitting your job with no plan B. But back onto the mindset stuff, I think the most common struggle that I see people who want to become entrepreneurs have is, will I be able to sustain a business that's pretty much 100% reliant on me? And not just like, I just have to show up and money will come into my account every month. So being able to take the business full time, and then that imposter syndrome of, who am I to be an entrepreneur? Who am I to be a coach? Who am I to run my own business? Who am I to charge these rates? Who am I to live in a different country whenever I want? All those kinds of things I see pop up quite often. And I'm happy to talk about like ways to kind of deal with that.
I was just about to ask, it'd be great to maybe share some of your techniques of how to overcome those fears, because they're very real. And I think to an extent, some of them never really go away, do they? Even when you do become a boss.
Yeah. And I think that's a big shift that happened in me is I realized that no matter what happened, I just was not going to quit. And I think that's the big thing that separates the people that make it and the ones that don't, is it doesn't matter how many pivots your business goes through or how many failed ideas or new ideas you start. It's just that knowing, that inner trust that like, I'm going to make it and I'm just not going to stop. But I've often said that when we're feeling stuck, overwhelmed, or confused, there's two possible things that are going on. The first is that we're focusing too far in the future. And, we've got this big idea of what we want to create, but it almost becomes, it almost works against us, and it becomes this daunting, like massive thing that we want to achieve. And in my podcast is very focused on the quarter life crisis. And it's the same thing there. It's like, this is the life I want to create, but like, this is what I'm doing now. And you can't quite see how to connect those two things. And there's a really cool analogy that I like to use of a rubber band. And if you put a rubber band between your two fingers and you start stretching it, there's tension there. And it's the same, there's tension here where we have this big vision for the business we want to create, but we're way down here. How do we bridge that gap? And there's two ways you can bridge the gap. The first is that you make your vision smaller, which no one really wants to do. But the second is that you start moving towards it. And if you have the rubber band on your two fingers and there's tension there, you start moving towards that thing, the tension is going to decrease. So that's the one is having this big vision, but you're focusing too far in the future. And the other is that maybe we are focused on our next step and not just this thing in the future, but our next step is too big. And if that's the case, then you simply need to pick a smaller next step. And there's no such thing as the next step that is too small. So it could be, reaching out to one of the speakers you've seen on the summit if what they said resonated with you. It could be downloading someone's ebook or joining their Facebook group. Whatever's going to feel like a step in the right direction, but really low barrier to entry for you, that's the thing you need to be focusing on. And then that's, that overwhelm kind of starts disappearing as you rack up these small wins. So instead of like worrying of how far you still have to go, just put your attention on doing the best job that you can with the task that's in front of you, and keep sort of building that momentum and getting those small wins. And then if the problem is, that you've got this idea for your business, start building it on the side while you're still employed. See your current employer as an investor in your side gig. Because once you do go out on your own, there's nothing else going to be bringing in the bills. So now is a really great time to start experimenting. And then once your income from your side gig starts getting close to your current day job income, then you can take a look at making that leap. And then the last point I wanted to add here was that whole thing of faking it till you make it. And I don't really gel well with that. I think instead of faking it till you make it, you should become it until you make it. So those are some points I have on, dealing with that overwhelm and that kind of thing.
I love that. Really practical points there. And it sounds like a lot of it is just about momentum, just start by starting, basically.
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. Really, really great advice. Now, you're here to talk to us a little bit about finding passion and purpose. And I know that a lot of, my coaching clients and a lot of people that are coming on this summit sometimes get a little bit stuck in this space. And I wondered, would you be able to talk around a little bit why it's important, if you deem it important, to really try and connect with your passion and purpose, especially in the early stages of starting a business?
Yeah, this is a huge one that I get from clients and podcast listeners and all that kind of thing. And I don't think this is limited to people in our generation, but I do think it's way more common now as people are realizing they can make a bigger impact. There are different career opportunities that didn't exist before. And so now people are asking those bigger questions. And I actually think from all the advice and insights I've got from guests on my podcast, and I've interviewed almost 80 people now every week. Well, not 80 every week, but you know what I mean. Yeah. And I actually think that we all have the same purpose, the same one universal purpose, and that is to become the best version of ourselves that we can in order to contribute to others. And I think when it comes to entrepreneurship and startups, I think they also have the same purpose, which is to solve people's problems. That's essentially what an entrepreneur does, is they come up with new solutions to solve people's problems. And within that one purpose, you'll have different missions, so different ways of getting there. Whether that's like yourself, you have different missions, or different businesses have different missions for solving the same problem. And so if people are, you asked, why is it so important to find your passion or your purpose as an entrepreneur or a startup? The reason you got into this, or the reason you're thinking of starting your own business, is so that you can do something more meaningful. And I think when you kind of forget that and you make it just about the money, you start to lose touch with that big why that you created in the beginning, and then your motivation starts to fade. But passion and purpose is a funny one. It's often, people often want to try and find their passion before they do something. Whereas passion and purpose, I interviewed a guy called Tom Asacker, and he said that your passion isn't out there, it's in here. And what he means is that you can't try and think of what your passion is before you take action. You need to take action, and then that clarity that comes from the data and the feedback that you get from taking that action, that informs you as to what you're passionate about. So someone might be wanting to start a social media, like a social media agency or freelancing business. That's cool. They can think of that conceptually, but until they actually start taking action and like finding one person that they can help in that way, they might find that they actually don't really enjoy it. It looks cool because there's so many social media managers online that live cool lifestyles, but until they've taken the action of, helping one person that way. And we spoke about small steps, like find one person who you can add value to. Until you've taken that action and got clarity, like, hey, actually, this isn't that exciting for me. You can't really figure out if you're passionate about it. And so, yeah, I mentioned, the reason you got into it is because you wanted to do something meaningful. And if you kind of lose sight of that, then that motivation starts to fade. And when that motivation starts to fade, your side business or your own business starts to become, I hate to say it, like a 9-to-5 again, where you're just doing it to show up and make the money. Except that this time, there's no guarantee that there'll be a paycheck at the end of the month. And your hours become not 9-to-5, but maybe like 6 a.m. till 10 p.m. So those are some thoughts I had around that.
Yeah. I mean, I absolutely love that trail of thought, especially about not really looking outwardly to find the passion. and maybe just to try a few things that you're really interested in, and see what kind of sits well and sits with your values. So I love that as a way of looking, definitely as a way of looking at it. So if, in your opinion, what sort of top 3 ways could someone who is just exploring their purpose in life, or just sort of going out there, I know you kind of touched on it, but what kind of ways can they start today, start really exploring what their more purpose over and above money could be?
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. The first step, I would say, is to draw 3 circles on a piece of paper. And in the first circle, you want to write down things that you are good at doing. So these are things that come naturally to you that other people would say, oh, you're really good at that, or just things that you are good at doing, your skills. In the second circle, I want you to write down all the things that you really enjoy doing, things that you would basically pay to do, things that it doesn't feel like work when you do these things that you are passionate about. And then in the third circle, write down all the ways in which, all the things that people would be willing to pay for and needs that the world has. And if you can combine like what you're good at, what the world needs, and what you enjoy doing, that sweet spot in the middle is going to be a really good starting point. And what you want to do is try and come up with as many ideas as possible inside there. And these are your possible options to explore. Then the second step is do. Like I mentioned, your passion isn't out there, it's in here. I want you to pick one of those things. And this leads to the third point, is commit to doing it for a certain period of time, whether that's 3 months, which is a period of time I like, or even more. I wouldn't really go less than that, because it doesn't give you enough time to really make a dent and take steps and get good data or feedback. But giving yourself a time to commit to it, and then reevaluating at the end of that time and seeing, like, did this work? Did I really enjoy it? And if not, like, don't be afraid to quit or to pivot. Quitting or pivoting is not a failure. The failure is carrying on doing the same thing if it's not getting the results that you're trying to get. And so just those 3 steps, again, it's coming up with a list of options, picking one of them and committing to it for a certain time period. And if that's not the thing, take a look at those options again that you got in step 1, and then repeat the process.
Brilliant. Really, really sound advice. And really useful for someone who's just feeling a little bit lost and not really sure where to start. That's great. So what about on the flip side, when someone's got lots of ideas?
Yeah.
Kind of narrow down, because that's another big thing with startups, when people come with lots and lots of ideas. Do you have any suggestions there about how you can really start to narrow down the one to move forward with?
Yeah, and I totally relate. I think part of being an entrepreneur is that you have all these ideas of cool things that you could start, like all the different needs that people have. And I have I used to use Trello. I now moved everything to Workflowy. I have a Workflowy list full of project ideas and that kind of thing. But basically it comes down to similar steps we described before. And if you look at the word focus, I think John Lee Dumas first coined this, or maybe he got it from somewhere else, but focus is simply follow one course until success. And so it kind of comes to the same thing, pick one of those things that you have, one of those ideas, one of the many ideas and passions that you have, pick one of them and commit to it with everything you have for a certain period, and then evaluate at the end of the period. I was working with a client recently who, he wanted to do photography, and he wanted to do freelance writing and launch like a course, like an educational online course. And he'd been doing this for like 2 or 3 months. And I said to him, how do you think things might have been different if at the start of these last 3 months, you just picked photography, for example, and committed all your energy to just focusing on photography? And the thing is, you would have got way better progress, but 3 months goes by so quickly. So it's not like by choosing this one idea, the others are going to be scrapped out for the rest of your life. It's just focusing on one thing until you've got it to a point where you can evaluate, like, is this worth following, or not. And then you can go back to that other list of things. 3 months is really, really not a lot, but it's enough to get feedback. And I think a lot of this has to do with FOMO, that if we're going to choose one thing, that the others are going to get kind of left behind. We almost see our ideas as entrepreneurs. We almost see our ideas like children. Like, well, if I don't take care of this thing, then it's going to get neglected and die. But that's really not the case. And then the other is, if one of those options starts going well, then you can look at one of those other things as a new side gig. And so you've made a business around one of the ideas. Now you start pursuing that thing as a side gig. Whether you've started outsourcing to a VA and it frees up more time for you to focus on the side gig or your second idea, that's another option. And the third option is you can give your ideas away. And if you really care about an idea, it's because you think that it could solve a problem for people. And if you care enough about solving that problem, you'll give the idea away if you don't have the scope to focus on it. Or even if it doesn't mean 100% giving it away, you could partner with someone so that you don't have to take all the time and energy required to turn that into a business. You can partner with someone who has maybe strengths that you don't have, and that'll allow you to free up some, or not take up so much time, so that you can turn this into a business.
Yeah, brilliant. Love that. Brilliant. So thank you so much, Brian. I think that there's so much to think about for anyone who's been struggling with finding their sort of passions or trying to figure out what their purpose is. And you've laid everything out in a really manageable way. So thank you for that. I'd love to know, in your experience, what is the best thing about being your own boss?
I interviewed a role model or a mentor of mine, Jason Goldberg. He's a coach and author and speaker. And when I interviewed him, he said, entrepreneurship is great. You get to design your own 80 hours a week. And it's funny because people think that when they start their own business, they get to, the whole 4-hour work week thing. And you do end up actually working more. But honestly, to me, the best thing about being your own boss is getting to design your own lifestyle and to fit your work into the rest of your life and not try to fit your life into the rest of your work. And a personal example for me is I recently got married and my wife had a son from a previous relationship. So I became a stepdad at the same time. And it's really rewarding to be able to take a morning off to go and watch like a school concert, or to go and pick him up from like an extramural activity or anything like that. So maybe not everyone can relate if they don't have kids and they're watching this, but basically just to design your lifestyle to emphasize the things that are important to you, and have your work fit in with that.
Absolutely, definitely. And I'd love to know, what are the biggest challenges? Because that's something that we don't always talk about as entrepreneurs.
Mm-hmm.
What have been the biggest challenges you found?
It's similar to those things I mentioned earlier, the imposter syndrome of like, I'm a first generation entrepreneur, and I don't even know if I'd call myself an entrepreneur versus just being self-employed. I think there's a subtle difference. But I'm basically, in my family, the first generation like self-employed person. Everyone else has worked for a company, or like ended up becoming the boss of that company. But I still struggle with those same things we mentioned earlier. Like, can I be an entrepreneur? Am I good enough? Do I have what it takes? Will people pay me to support them? All those kinds of things. And then, the distractions become a very real challenge as well. When you're working from home, it's so easy to kind of blur the lines between like treating something as a hobby and treating something as a business. I think that's a big challenge that people, and certainly myself, face as well.
Definitely, it's something to think about. So tell me, if you could think of one big lesson that being self-employed, being an entrepreneur has taught you, what would that be? Taught you about yourself, what would that be?
Mm-hmm. I had this realization when I was still at my job, and it was probably one of the things that kind of pushed me over the edge, was that no one's going to make life awesome for me. And so if you have like this vision of the lifestyle you want to create, no one's going to bend over backwards and, break their back to make that happen for you. If you want to create something different, it's up to you to go and make that happen. And that's what I realized is, like, if this is what I want and this is what I say I want, then it's up to me to go and make that happen. And, since choosing that path, I've realized that there is no one right path. Before, I thought like I was going to be married by this age and have a kid by this age. And like, this is the work I'm going to be doing, and following all these steps that people believe is the road to success. But I've realized now that there's no one right path, and you really can create your own idea of a good life and have it.
Definitely. Now, you have an amazing freebie for our viewers today. Could you tell us a little bit more about it?
Yeah, so a lot of what we spoke about today comes down to self-awareness. It's knowing like who you are and what you want and why you're here. And so I put together an ebook called Do You Know You? And basically it's it's 6 exercises. I say 5, but I throw in a bonus one at the end. 6 journaling exercises asking you some kind of some deeper questions which you may not have thought of before. And people can find that at bryanteare.com/SYB for Start Your Business. And that's BRYANTEARE.com/SYB.
Brilliant. So it's a great way to get started, guys. You can actually download that workbook right here next to the video. So please go right. And get that. It will be so valuable for you. Brian, tell us what's next for you.
Yeah, it's it's a funny question, because I mentioned like trying to stay focused on the next step and focus on the process and not the goal. But obviously we all do have our big goals and our big visions. I've interviewed almost 80 people now, almost 85 probably. And so I definitely have plans to turn all those interviews into a book, and do more speaking gigs based on everything I've learned, some of the stuff we spoke about today, but even in other areas as well. So speaking is one that I want to pursue as well. And then I mentioned pivots earlier, and I think I might be at a pivot point myself. A lot of my podcast is centered around 20-somethings and like the quarter life crisis and that kind of thing. Whereas I'm feeling more and more drawn towards working with top performers and high achievers and entrepreneurs and leaders and influencers and founders and that kind of thing on high performance and mindset stuff and personal mastery. So we'll see how that pans out. But I think I'm right at the start of that kind of pivot point. And then also exploring as a potential direction is supporting coaches and entrepreneurs with the sides of their business that they shouldn't be focusing on. So things like websites and the online business support and that kind of things free up more time for them to focus on serving their clients. But these are very new ideas, and like the life of an entrepreneur, I guess. So we'll see how they pan out.
Amazing. Well, good luck. Best of luck with all of those projects, or just one. We really, really can't thank you enough for joining us today. Now, before I let you go, do you have any parting words of wisdom for our aspiring entrepreneurs?
Yes. As I mentioned, I've interviewed almost 85 people now for 85 consecutive weeks. And by far, the number one piece of advice I can give is just get started. There are people who really wanted to do something that were never limited by the excuses that you're telling yourself now. And another example that I like to think of is that people have come from way tougher circumstances than I have and gone on to do way bigger things than I have. So there really isn't an excuse. And, it's like that Steve Jobs, to paraphrase, where he said that everything around you in the world was created by people who were no smarter than you. So really, if you have an idea for your side business, whether you're still working a 9 to 5, or you have quit and you're looking to use the summit as the catalyst for growing your business and finally pursuing that path that you've been dreaming of, just get started and take the steps along the way. Build up those small wins, gather momentum, and just keep taking that next step.
Brilliant. Brian, thank you.
So there you have it, guys and girls. That wraps up episode 83 of the Quarter Life Comeback podcast. And a big thanks once again to Irene for having me on the summit. It was a lot of fun. And if you enjoyed this episode, please share it around with your friends on social media and shoot me a tweet at Brian Tier to let me know your biggest takeaway. For me, it's the parting words I left at the end, which is please, 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 just get started. If you have an idea, if you have a dream or a goal of starting your own business, just take that tiny next step and build the momentum and the small wins along the way. As always, you can get the links and resources we mentioned in this episode at briantier.com/083, and make sure you head on over to quarterlifecomeback.com to subscribe for even more episodes like this as soon as they go live. A quick mention again about the Facebook group. It's briantier.com/FB group, and you can hang out with me backstage, find out how I do things, and share with others who are interested in personal mastery and all that kind of good stuff. Again, that's briantier.com/FB group. Thanks once again for joining me this week, and until next time, keep creating your quarter life comeback.